Welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of Let's Build a Startup. I'm your host, Serge Torka, and together we're going to build a completely open startup completely from scratch. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, I've been building things since I was in grade school. I built my first company, founded my first company right out of university, and since then I've built a moderately successful business doing millions of dollars in revenue. This was all done completely bootstrapped, so I didn't take any investor money to start the business. And now I want to do something a little bit more impactful and share some of the things that I've learned over the years with somebody who today is in the same position that I was in 10 or 15 years ago. I've made a lot of mistakes over the years, and I think a lot of them are general mistakes. So they're things that can apply to others. And so I'll try to talk through, as I'm building the company, I'll try to talk through everything that I'm doing. And my goal here is to build a more successful company than anything that I've done in the past. And so that means that there will be new unexplored territory, and I will be making lots of mistakes. And hopefully some of your feedback will help mitigate some of those mistakes. Okay, so the first part of building a company is you have to decide what the company is going to do. What is the mission of the company? What goal are you trying to solve? So what I like to do is I have an idea list that every time I see something that's wrong in the world or something that could be done better, I write it down on my list. And over time, this is a growing document of ideas that I can go back to for inspiration and just to see what kinds of things I was thinking about. I like to review this document every 6 to 12 months, just because often some of the ideas that I was thinking about in the past might be newly relevant to things that I'm thinking about now. All right, so here is my unfiltered idea list. I didn't make any edits to it because I want it to be as close as possible to what's actually in my head. So I have a very technical background, and so some of my ideas are technical in nature. And unfortunately, those are not a good fit for this channel because we're trying to build the company in the open, right? So we want things that are very easy to understand for a broad range of audiences. And because of that, anything that requires deep understanding or deep domain expertise in any field is not really a good fit. So we're going to skip those for now, and I might put those in a separate video if there's enough interest. So we're going to split this video into multiple sections. We're first going to cover bad ideas, then we're going to cover obsolete ideas, then we're going to cover maybe ideas. These are ideas that are not quite in my field, or they're ideas that are small, so that they might make good first-time businesses, but not what I'm looking for. And then we're going to cover the good or great ideas. These are the ideas that have been on my list for a substantial amount of time, and I've put enough thought into how they might work that I see a way to profitability and also a way to make a big business. And just one note before we start, because we're trying to do everything open, I really want you to understand my thought process. And so I'm going to go into a fair amount of detail, even with the bad ideas. Okay, and so if you're not interested in analyzing bad ideas, you can just skip through to the good ones. First one is a Raspberry Pi to have a full-blown desktop experience on the TV. So when I originally wrote this idea down, what I had in my head was I want to lie down and write some code, but that is a very niche idea. I don't think you could build a business out of that. If you kind of pivot a little bit and say, what is the mass market idea that could come out of here? It's basically video games plus a media center. So if you were going to build video games plus a media center experience on the TV, right, like a couch PC or couch computing, the problem is that you have to compete against all the incumbents who already have great content libraries and a great media center experience, right? So Xbox, PS5, all the consoles have great media center experiences. Steam has a great media center experience. There are even open source ones like XBMC that also have a great media center experience. And most of these guys already have full content libraries. And so because of that, I can't think of anything that I could offer to the media center experience that is a 10x improvement on what already exists. And so this is not a great idea. That being said, there is one idea I had, which is a bad idea. So I want to be clear, it is a bad idea, but it is interesting enough that I want to cover it anyways. So the idea was, remember, I wanted to write code from the couch. And the problem was that all of the input methods available at the time were not quite a great fit for that because I wanted to lie down. So a wireless keyboard is actually quite good if you're okay with sitting up at the couch, but I wanted to lie down. And so that didn't quite work. The best thing that I've found was a special keyboard that you attach to an Xbox controller, and then it's kind of like a BlackBerry physical keyboard, right? So you type on it. It's pretty good. It's about as fast as a cell phone. I thought I could do something where it didn't require any extra hardware, so you'd just be able to use the joysticks to type, and it looks something like this. So if I have my two joysticks like this, okay, so there are enough degrees of freedom in those joysticks that I can actually spell out every single letter and have enough room left over for a very large alphabet for things like symbols and, curly braces, all kinds of any other characters that I want in my alphabet that are usually very helpful for writing code. And so, for example, an A might look like this. Right, so if you move your joysticks in those directions, right? You can imagine the letter A filled in here. Okay, the letter B might look something like this. Okay, the letter C, right? Maybe you move both joysticks in the shape of a C. The letter D would look kind of like a B, but backwards. Okay, and so you can imagine you can create unique movements for the joysticks for every letter of the alphabet and for every symbol that you might need for coding. And this actually works quite well. So I built a prototype of it when I first thought of the idea, and it does work reasonably well. It's about as fast and as accurate as the BlackBerry style hardware keyboard attachment. The problem with it is that it requires about an hour to 2 hours to learn the alphabet. And I think that's not quite a mass market, right? Like very few people are going to be willing to spend an extra hour or two just to learn how to type again. And so because of that, I don't think this is a great idea. A few years after I had this, Steam released something called a daisy wheel, which is kind of a similar idea, but using the D-pad and the XY, AB, XY buttons. And that also, they shut it down a few years after that because it just didn't work. I think the learning curve is too high for that. And so one of the things you want to remember when you're thinking of something to do is you really want the on-ramp to your product to be as smooth as possible. So you want somebody to be able to get value almost as soon as possible. If the longer the delay until the customer sees something useful from what you're building, the less likely your product is to succeed. Mention bots on Twitter. All right. Okay, off to a good start. Self-cleaning house. So the idea I had here was maybe you could do something with the floors or the walls or something that they would kind of auto move the garbage over. There's no way that this is going to make it to market faster than a robot that cleans your house. And so, yeah, this is just too slow to do it this way. Okay, the next one is opposite of FML. So when I wrote this is more than a decade ago, there was this popular meme of saying something bad that happened in your life and then typing FML. And there were even communities and websites that spun up around it. And I thought that maybe you could do something for the optimists, right? So something awesome happening in your life. So you type something and then say awesome life or something like that. And you could build a dedicated website for it. And if you could build a big community, you could support the website on ad dollars. And I just think that there aren't that many people that would be interested in participating, right? The meme kind of died out. It was too much of a fad. It had no lasting potential. Hire Vector Flower from Code Canyon. All right, Vector Flower, I don't remember who you are, but obviously you must have done something great to make it on my list. So great job, Vector Flower. All right, the next one is restaurant app for splitting bill inside the restaurant. So this is when you and a few friends go to a restaurant, you share some meals together and you want to split them and you don't want to make the waiter do all the math. The problem with this is it's quite niche. So what I've realized when I was a university student, we would have this problem, once a month. But as I've gotten older, this problem just goes away, like as soon as you're out of university, because there are just nicer ways to do that. So for example, if there's a shared meal between the table, one of us will pay for it, and then next time somebody else will pay for it, and you just rotate. And as long as nobody's abusing the system, that works reasonably well and is a lot less cumbersome and tedious than having to calculate the bill each time. All right, the next one. So the idea was for an app or website to extract all the pictures that I'm tagged in on Facebook. So I don't see how you can make money with this. On top of that, Facebook is subject to the GDPR law in Europe. And so they're probably required to give you all this data anyways if you just ask them. And so because of that, not a good idea. Okay, the next one is a Nintendo DS emulator for computer and tablet. This is obviously a bad idea. Okay, don't infringe other people's copyrights. The problem is even if you succeed and make something compelling, you constantly have the threat of litigation and of Nintendo just shutting you down. So yeah, not a good idea to build a business on top of infringing others' copyrights. All right, next idea, write about proliferation of bots on Twitter. This is the second time I have it on my list. I had it up above somewhere. Okay, so this is not a business idea. This is dumb. I don't know why I added this here. Obviously, I was very annoyed with the bots on Twitter, and this was more than a decade ago. So, all right, another bad idea. So the idea is that you can remove traffic lights completely and replace them with underground pedestrian tunnels and bridges for turning. So that looks something like this. So let's say you have a normal intersection. This is a bad idea, by the way, just as a reminder. Okay, so, and let's say you have two directions. Okay, so normally an intersection, half of the cars can't go, right? Because there's a red light, and so only half of the cars can go through. And so if you can figure out a way to remove the lights, then you could actually double the throughput of every intersection. And so that would be a huge win for traffic. And so the idea is that you just replace the lights with tunnels and bridges so that everyone can go everywhere without stopping. Okay, so first let's do pedestrians. So pedestrians, you replace the lights with underground bridges, something like this. All right, next you do right turns for cars. So right turns stay exactly the same as they were before. Next, we do going straight. So going straight, one of the directions is going to stay the same. So let's say north and south stay the same, and the other direction goes through a tunnel. So it's going to go that way through a tunnel, and it's going to go that way through a tunnel. Now, obviously, these tunnels that are for the cars have to have enough clearance over here and over here that they don't intersect with the pedestrian tunnels. All right, so the next one is the left turns, and you'll see why this is a bad idea in a second. So let's say we want to do left turns. So that goes that way. This one goes this way. This one goes this way. And finally, we have this one going that way. Okay, so basically it's a huge mess. All right, so the problem is that it's so expensive to build all these tunnels and bridges that it's probably not worth the boost in throughput that you get by removing the lights. And on top of that, I've actually drawn this as if it could fit inside the space of an existing intersection, but it can't, right? You need much, much larger intersections in order to accommodate this. And so this is a bad idea, except for some very, very specific circumstances. Okay, next bad idea is crowdsourced shipping. All right, this is a terrible idea. In fact, I want to show how bad of an idea it is. So let's go to my tablet here. And so let's say this is the continental United States. So if you want to, let's say you're in New York and you want to deliver a package to Los Angeles. And so the way that delivery happens today is through a hub and spoke model. So there is some hub in Kansas, and you put your package on a plane in FedEx, and every morning there's a plane that goes from every location to Kansas, and every afternoon there's a plane that leaves from Kansas to every other location. Okay, and so you can get one-day shipping through this hub and spoke model. The problem is that it requires a plane. Okay, and so my idea was maybe you could do something where you can ship but without needing any extra capacity in the network, right? So you can just get rid of the plane but still have the items ship. And the idea was kind of like through osmosis. So the package would just migrate its way over to the intended destination just through people on their daily commutes, right? So imagine every day there's millions of people commuting to and from work. And so if you could find a chain of such people from where the package originates to its destination, then you could kind of play relay with the package and get it to where it needs to go. And you wouldn't need a plane, right? It would just go on people's daily commutes, right? So you imagine there's somebody commuting this way, and somebody commuting this way, and somebody commuting this way, right? Somebody commuting this way, this way, this way, right? It might take a little bit of a roundabout route. You can build this chain out of commuters, and then the package makes its way. Okay, so let's talk about problem number one, and that's delivery time. So if you're trying to tie all of these commuters together, you need to wait for each one of them to commute back and forth from work. And so that means that each link in the chain is taking an entire day. And so to ship a package across the country, that's easily, tens of links that you need to do in order to get the package there. And having a 20 or 30 day delivery time is just not competitive with something like Amazon or FedEx. The other problem is that you need so much trust that no part of the chain will break, right? So if any link in the chain is malicious, right, they just take your package, now the entire chain is broken. And so you actually need to trust like 30 individual people in order to have your package successfully be delivered. The final problem is that this is a two-sided marketplace. So there are a bunch of drivers that are commuting every day and a bunch of people who want their goods shipped. And the problem is if you don't have enough drivers, there won't be any demand from the people sending packages. And if you have no people sending packages, there won't be any demand from the drivers to participate in your service. And so it's very easy that for most routes, you actually can't even complete the entire route because you need to have such a high density of drivers all over the country. Okay, next bad idea. A light switch on any wall using cameras and motion detection. So the idea here was that instead of installing a physical light switch in every room in your house, sometimes multiple switches per room, you install a single camera somewhere in the corner of a room, and that camera would just watch every wall in the room, and you could tap any wall as if there was a light switch there, and the camera would turn on or off the lights. Okay, this is more of a gimmick. This is not, I can't really see a way that you can actually make money from this. The problem is that competing alternatives to this are so much better than this idea that I just can't see a way to make money. So, for example, a physical light switch is probably better than this. The other alternative is something like Amazon Alexa or Google Home, where you use voice to control the lights, and that is just better than looking goofy every time smacking the wall to turn the lights on. Okay, so not a great idea. Okay, the next bad idea is a to-do app. There's some specifics about how I wanted my to-do app to be, but those are not important. I think it's very difficult to make money with a to-do app. There's millions of them. And so it's just very, very difficult to build a business out of a to-do app. Okay, the next bad idea is computerized rails with chairs for transportation. So what I was thinking here, first of all, it's not a chair really, it's more of a pod, so it'd have a covering so that you don't get rained on. But what I was thinking is you'd have these pods kind of all around the city, and they would be able to stop at every bus stop. So they're not just stopping at rail stations. You extend the rail network to stop at every bus stop. The idea I had was maybe you could use the existing rail infrastructure to kind of build on top of it. But the problem is you can't really do that because the existing rail networks are built such that there are large trains and they mostly never stop. So imagine you have one pod sitting stuck in front of a big train holding up thousands of passengers just for one passenger to get off. That's not really efficient. You would actually need kind of a parallel rail network, and that just costs enormous amounts of money to build up, especially in already populated areas. So I think the Boring Company is a much better solution to this because it's backwards compatible with the existing system. You just use normal electric cars to start, and over time you can shrink the size of the electric cars as they become more and more feature capable. This bad idea is actually a good general lesson for how to pursue ambitious projects. Okay, so let's draw a chart here. So this is time, and this is profit. You have a huge investment to build out the rail infrastructure, right? Because one individual additional rail is not very useful because there's no passengers that would find that useful. So you actually need to cover almost an entire city or some important aspect of a city before there's demand. And then only after you've built out all of that infrastructure do you get a return. Okay, so you start being profitable, and then after some time, you recoup all of the investment that you've put into the business. An approach that is much more likely to succeed is to break that investment up into individually profitable units. So for example, the first unit would be build a profitable electric car. The next unit would be build a profitable self-driving for an electric car. The next unit would be build a test tunnel in Las Vegas at a very popular location where just that tunnel alone will be profitable. And then finally, you build out the rest of the network once you've shown that a small piece of it can be profitable. And so in this model, investors have to tolerate much less pain and for a much shorter duration of time. And so because of that, they're much more likely to be motivated, right? The same goes for employees. Employees who are working for a long time not seeing results, they're not going to be as motivated. Same goes for politicians. Especially if you're building up a transportation network, you probably need to work with the municipality in order to get it built. And so you really want to show success very early on so that you encourage investment to continue. And so because of this, the Boring Company approach is just much more likely to win at solving a problem like this. So this pattern applies generally, not just for transportation. If you have a big project, it is way more likely to succeed if you can break it up into individually profitable components. Okay, the next bad idea is an ultra-thin monitor with minimal ports that can look like an art piece. So what I was thinking is there's maybe one wire that's attached to the monitor, and even that goes behind a wall or something so that you hide it. So it just literally looks like a painting. The problem is that since I wrote this down, LG has started shipping monitors that are just like this, and they already have a 10 or 20 year head start. And there's nothing that I can think of that I can do better than LG, right? I don't have a 10x improvement on what they're already doing. So there's just no way for this to work. All right, the next bad idea is to have robot insects with sensors for gathering farm data. So what I was picturing in my head is you have this mothership that has a bunch of little ant robots, and it's kind of like the mothership is going around the farm and constantly sending out its ants to collect the data and then come back to recharge and upload the data. And then you'd be able to get this really high precision information about your farm, right? So it would be like per millimeter squared. You'd be able to get like the temperature, the soil quality, the humidity, all kinds of information about the plants. So the problem is that building a mothership with ants is a difficult problem that is not trivial. And even if you solve that problem, the solution is likely to be far more expensive than what has been standardized in the industry, which is to have an autonomous drone that flies over your farm field with sensors and it just collects data from the air. Right, so the autonomous drone, you won't get millimeter level precision, but you will get centimeter level precision, and that is more than good enough for every farm. And so, yeah, just there's a much better solution than this. And so it doesn't make sense to pursue this. All right, so the next bad idea is to have a design channel on YouTube with logos taped to the wall. This is not much of an idea. Okay, the next bad idea is to build a competitor to Alexa.com. So Alexa.com was this website that would gather statistics about other websites. So if you wanted to know how popular your website was, you'd go to Alexa.com, you'd enter your website, and you'd see kind of a global ranking, approximate ranking of how well your website was doing relative to other websites. And the way that Alexa would gather this data was kind of shady. They would bundle these browser toolbars with various popular apps that you download, and they'd spy on your data that way, and then use that to get those results. And the idea was to do that through another avenue, so basically to bundle with popular Chrome extensions or things like that, and track users' data that way. The problem with this is it's a very shady business. So even if you are able to pull it off, can you sleep at night knowing that you're siphoning all these users' private data? And also, will your business survive if customers or users of that extension find out that that's what you're doing? All right, the next bad idea is ad libs at the end of YouTube videos. I don't even know why this is not a good idea. The next bad idea is a site to automatically crop pictures for Twitter and Facebook. This is not a good idea. This is too small. This is a feature that Twitter or Facebook might implement themselves and not something that you could make money on. Okay, the next bad idea is a quadcopter for dusting surfaces. So the idea I had was instead of having a robot that goes and wipes your surfaces, maybe you have a little quadcopter with a duster attached, and it just flies over and intelligently goes over all the surfaces in your house. I think even if you could build this, autonomous robots will get to market faster and will do a better job just because of how much investment there is behind the autonomous robots compared to quadcopters that do dusting. So the next bad idea is a small-scale fulfillment company. So this would be targeted at founders using things like Kickstarter, where they're building a physical product and they're doing it in small batches, right? So they might have 1,000 units or something like that. And in order to ship them out, they actually have to pack those products themselves, right? They have things called packing parties where all the employees of the company, instead of working on making the products better, they're spending their time packing them into boxes to ship them out to customers. And so the idea was maybe you could build something that targets this small scale founder and helps them offload that burden so that they don't have to do the packing themselves. So the problem is that because of the small scale, it's hard to solve this problem well or even profitably. And even if you could, somebody like Amazon or Kickstarter would do a much better job just because they have so much more information about various products and they already have logistics chains set up to solve this problem. All right, the next bad idea is a YouTube competitor that shows ads during buffering. The problem is that fixing the buffering is a much better solution than showing ads during buffering. And YouTube, as of today, I very rarely experience buffering, and so this doesn't even make sense. All right, the next bad idea is an expensive ISP that competes on tech support. So the problem with this is that for the most part, an ISP is a commodity, okay? So people are just paying, I just want this much bandwidth, and the support that your ISP offers is a secondary value. Most customers will never have to interact with your support, and when they do, it's after 2 or 3 years of using the service. And somebody who's looking to purchase your service right now is not going to be willing to pay that premium for several years before finding out whether your support is actually good, right? Because you could just have the same quality of support as everybody else, but market it better, and so the customer is just taking a risk on that. All right, so we have another ant swarm bad idea. This time it's to clean crumbs. And the problem with that is that, once again, building an ant swarm is a very hard task, and there are going to be technologies that can clean crumbs much better than an ant swarm. And so this just doesn't work. So the next bad idea is to clone existing popular sites that I thought would be not very difficult to get all their data and put it on your site. The problem is that the value in these sites are not necessarily just the data, but it's also the brand name and the SEO, right? So what am I going to do to come up ahead of autotrader.com on Google? That is the hard problem. It's not getting the data, okay? And so because of that, unless you actually have a reason to build this competing website, that you're offering some sort of better experience where users prefer your website to the original, this doesn't make sense. And here I have another one, right? So a competitor to Rotten Tomatoes called Moo Moo Movies. The name's cute, but if I don't have something that I'm doing much better than Rotten Tomatoes, there's no reason for users to come to this site rather than Rotten Tomatoes, which already comes up first on Google. All right, so the next bad idea is a belt or clothing article made of batteries. So I guess the idea is if you're stuck in a blizzard and you're on your last 1%, you finally plug your phone into your pants and you're saved. I don't think that scenario is worth the trade-off where your pants are going to be very heavy. All right, the next bad idea is a solar funnel to collect lots of solar light onto a single solar panel. So the idea is if you could have, right, so let's say you have a single solar panel. This is a side view. Okay, so the sun is shining this way. Okay, so the way that you might double the amount of electricity you get is by adding another solar panel. But what if there was a cheaper way to do this? So instead of adding a second solar panel, what if you create a mirror in a special shape, looking something like this, so that when the sun hits the mirror, it reflects onto the solar panel, and so the solar panel gets more light on it. And if you could build this mirror cheaper than you could build a solar panel to capture the same amount of light, then that's a win, right? Then you could build big solar farms with using mostly mirrors rather than mostly solar panels. And the problem here is that I didn't understand the physics enough. So I actually built a prototype here, and the bottleneck on how much electricity a solar panel can collect is not actually the amount of sunlight that can hit the solar panel. It is the amount of heat that the solar panel can dissipate. Okay, so today's solar panels, they are not that good at dissipating heat. And so there's actually a maximum amount of sunlight that is allowed to hit the solar panel before it just starts melting. All right, the next bad idea is a no-hassle investment vehicle that allows poor people access to capital gains tax rates. This has to be illegal. I just don't know how. So the idea is you would form a joint company with your customer. So let's say you own 50% and your customer owns 50%. And then when your customer, so this is customer, this is business, and when your customer gets employed by somebody, so let's say they go to employer. Now, when the employer needs to pay the customer, they don't pay them directly. Instead, they do a contract with the shell company and pay the shell company. Okay, and now the shell company won't pay the customer. It will actually buy back shares from the customer. So it'll use the proceeds from the salary to buy back shares from the customer. And so now, if those shares have been held for long enough, so you'd create this shell company several years before this transaction occurs. And so the customer now, because they're selling shares, that would be treated as a capital gain rather than income. And capital gain has a smaller tax burden than income. And with the difference, you could pay yourself a small fee for saving your customer those taxes. Okay, I'm pretty sure this is illegal, and so it's probably a bad idea. All right, so that's it for the bad ideas. And up next, we're going to cover obsolete ideas. All right, so the first obsolete idea is Greyhound ticket security. So about 10 years ago, Greyhound used to force you to print paper tickets. So you'd have to print this sheet of paper to carry it with you. The barcode would be way up in the top of the page with no margin. And so if the page ever got wet or anything happened to it, like you got a little piece torn off, the scanner just wouldn't work. And so you wouldn't be able to get on the bus. The idea was to have a QR code instead. So you have a ticket, right, with a QR code. And so even if you cut a piece of the paper off, it works because there's redundancy built into the QR code. But now you don't even need a piece of paper. You can just use your phone. Every major ticketing software already uses your phone and some sort of QR code. And so this problem is obsolete. All right, the next obsolete idea is a QR code reader web app. So again, with the QR codes, this was at a time when not every smartphone would be able to natively read QR codes. And so the idea was to have a website so you could easily read them. This is obsolete. Every phone comes with a QR code reader now. All right, the next obsolete idea is an extension for your browser that would crowdsource summaries. So people would go to a website, type in a summary of the website, and you'd be able to see other people's summary, the top voted one for that website. ChatGPT just does this better than than you could with crowdsourcing. All right, the next obsolete idea is internet access on the subway. At least in the city that I live in, Toronto, this has already been solved by one of the wireless providers. All right, so the next obsolete idea is 911 emergency calling available online. So at the time that I wrote this is more than a decade ago, if you did not have a SIM card and a active phone number that you could call 911 with, so you have to be connected to a cell tower, you could not dial 911. Now I think every phone comes with 911 available, even if you're just connected to Wi-Fi. So the next obsolete idea is to build a television station that broadcasts YouTube videos that are pre-selected. So I think the YouTube homepage already has encroached into this territory. So it already gives reasonable recommendations. This was written at a time when the main way to watch things was through the subscriber list. So you didn't really have a homepage. You just had the folks that you subscribed to. Okay, the next obsolete idea is to have phone semantics for Skype. So at the time that I wrote this, Skype was the main way that people called each other online. And so with Skype, you had to make a friend request so that when in order to call somebody, you had to first send them a request, and then they had to accept and be your friend, and only after that could you call them. And that does not work for something like a bank or any sort of customer service department. The goal here was just to make it so that you had the same semantics, so you could just call anybody and it would just ring for them. And I think Zoom and Google Meet have already solved this problem. All right, so here's another obsolete idea. So I actually had a few entries here of various games times Hangouts. So this was at a time when Hangouts first came out. And for those that are too young to remember, Hangouts was the first time that you could have lots of people on the same phone call. So before that, there was Skype, which allowed you to have 2 people. I think there were a few apps that allowed you to have 3 people, but it wasn't like you could have 10 people in the same call all laughing together. And so when Hangouts first came out, my idea was to try to recreate the gameplay experience that I had as a kid when a lot of my friends would sit in the same room, even sometimes on the same computer, and take turns playing a game and just, everybody's laughing together and having a good time. And if we could do that remotely, that would be really fun. The approach that I thought of was to build it into the game, right? So you would build a Worms alternative. So Worms was this game where you got to shoot the other team's worms off of the mountain and build the social features into the game. The approach that ended up winning and is far better. So hats off to Discord. Discord has pretty much solved this problem for every game. The way that they've solved it is to build a great voice application that overlays onto any game. And so, yeah, that ended up just being a way better approach. And so hats off to Discord. They're executing extremely well. And I can't think of a way that I could build something 10 times better than what Discord is, especially given their lead and dominance in the market. All right, so the next section is maybe ideas. Okay, so these are ideas where I don't have a lot of domain expertise. So from the outside looking in, it feels like there's something there that could be done, but they're not the ideas that are right for me just because of my background and experience. All right, so the first maybe business is to build a magazine with 100% ads. So most magazines today are like 80% ads, and the 20% content just seems like filler. And so what ends up happening is that most people who buy the magazines end up buying them in large part for the ads. And so why not just replace the remaining 20% with ads as well? I think it might be possible to find specific target users where that works and the customer is still willing to pay you. All right, so the next maybe business is Teespring for posters. So for those that don't know, Teespring is this website that allows you to design a t-shirt, and if you can get enough people to buy your design, they'll print off a batch and run it, and you'll get some % of the sales. Well, I think you can do the same thing for posters, where you can have a site dedicated to poster designs, and then you'd have people design them, and then popular designs would get printed and sent out. Okay, so the next maybe business is a patent alliance. So you can think of this as a reverse patent troll. So a traditional patent troll collects a large portfolio of software patents, which are really broad, and then goes out and sends aggressive letters to lots of different companies that are infringing on one of those patents because the patent was given out too loosely. And it takes too much effort for any one company to try to fight the patent troll to invalidate the patent. So the idea with the alliance is that you're going to use the same tactics that a patent troll does, but in reverse. You're going to use it for defense rather than offense. A bunch of companies pool their patent portfolios together into one big portfolio, and then anybody in the alliance, whenever they get sued, the entire alliance's portfolio would be used to countersue the attacking party. And software patents have this problem that they are extremely broad and apply to almost every piece of software, and they're very easily given out. And so if you have a large enough portfolio of patents, almost any company that would be an attacker would also be infringing on one of the patents in your portfolio. And so you would structure this as an insurance business for the startups. And the deal that you would provide is for a small monthly fee, you'd provide patent insurance to the companies. So basically, if they get sued, you would defend them to a very high limit. And in exchange, all the startups that work with you would commit to contributing all of their patents that they file for in the future to the alliance. You also wouldn't be able to sue anybody in the alliance for software patent infringement. So this is actually a very difficult business to build because you need a large pool of patents to begin with. So the next maybe business is to build a couch system where you could build a couch out of smaller pieces and assemble it to kind of fit the room, kind of like Lego. This would also have a big benefit in shipping because you would be able to ship these couches in much smaller pieces. And so, for example, you wouldn't have problems with delivering them through awkward doors or around stairs or anything like that. You could assemble them on site once they get there. All right, so the next maybe business is to sell placebos. Okay, so the idea is in your drugstore, in addition to all the normal drugs, you also have a section that just sells placebos for various ailments. So for example, you might have a placebo for a sore foot, a placebo for an itchy nose, right? All kinds of things. Any ailment that you could think of, you could have a placebo for it based on demand. The placebos would just be labeled as placebos. And because we know that placebos have a positive impact on health outcomes, this would basically just make everybody happier. All right, the next maybe business is an IKEA Galant desk competitor. So IKEA used to make this desk called the Galant desk that of all the desks that I've ever used, it is by far the best. And they replaced it with a new model that is not nearly as good, in my opinion. And what I see in lots of different Reddit communities and other forums is that people really miss this desk. And so what I end up doing is every time I need a new desk, I end up having to search through Craigslist for a used one just because they don't make anything that's nearly as good. I'm not sure why they discontinued it. There must be some reason. But I think if you built the exact same desk and sold it at the exact same price that IKEA did, you could build a successful small business here. Okay, so the next maybe idea is a user test marketplace. So whenever you're building a product, particularly a software product, it's very valuable to be able to watch your users play with the product. And that way you can see any pitfalls or any points of confusion, where they get stuck. And so the idea is to build a marketplace of users who will test companies' products and companies who come to you when they want their products tested. And the companies would pay you, and you take a proportion of that payment as a fee and pay the rest to the user who's doing the work. And since I wrote this, I think there have been several of these marketplaces that have come out. Usertesting.com is a big one, for example. But I think it's enough of a fragmented market that you could still build a nice small business here. All right, the next maybe business is to build a Jackbox competitor. So for those that have never played Jackbox, it's this fun game that you play with your friends in the same room where everybody's looking at their phone, and also there's a TV screen that everybody can see. And so you have private information that can be given to every individual and shared public information that can be seen on the TV. And so there are various games that they've built around this concept. That style of game is very easy to build, and the replay value, it's really fun for about 2 or 3 hours, and then you need more games. And so what Jackbox does is they bundle 4 or 5 mini games into these things called party packs, and they release a new one every year. And each one is like $20. So you pay $20 for a bundle of 5 games. It provides about 3 or 4 hours of entertainment for you and your friends, which is more than worth it. It's cheaper than a movie. And so I think just building a party pack of games that Jackbox has not done, I think you could easily build a small business here, and it can be done by one person. All right, so the last maybe business is to build a new type of domain search engine where the primary interface is browsing and not searching. So most domain websites, you search for the exact domain that you want, and that's not always what I really need. So a lot of times I actually don't care specifically what the domain is, just that it sounds good. This is just from experience that a lot of .coms are available for a few $1,000, and often I'd rather buy a reasonable .com than a really good .app or .net or whatever, just because of the status that the .com brings. All right, so that's it for the maybe businesses. And now we're going to move on to businesses that I think are still good ideas. So they've been on the list for a long time, and they're still things that I think about daily. All of the businesses that I've mentioned so far, I actually spend very little time thinking about them. So they do take up a large portion of my list, but most of my thoughts are not about them. Where I spend the most amount of time thinking is about these upcoming businesses. All right, so the first one, so it says here, app.net client with better threading support and real-time stream updates. So most of that is actually irrelevant. Just for background, App.net was this protocol that came out about a decade ago, and the idea was to build the back end of a messaging service. So think of the back end of Twitter, and then every client, so every app would be built by third-party developers. And so App.net would provide this protocol, and then every social app that you could think of could be built on top of this protocol. So App.net failed, but I did go to a hackathon, again, about a decade ago, and unfortunately, I don't remember his name, but the guy sitting beside me helped me with coming up with this idea for a competitor to Reddit. Okay, so this is how you could build a Reddit that is 10 times better. And I think just this improvement alone is enough to overcome the switching cost so that you could get people to migrate from Reddit to your site. And this is particularly relevant with all the moderators threatening to leave Reddit. So the idea is an improvement on the UX. So if we switch to my tablet here, this is what every forum or social website looks like. You have your original post, let's call it 1. Then you have some post in response to that, let's call it 2. Then you have some responses to 2, so call it 3. Maybe there's some other responses to 2, okay? And then there's another response to 2, called 4. And then it has some other responses. And then eventually, after a very long time, there's another response to 1. And so we'll call that 5. Okay? And then 5 also has responses, right? So you might have a response 6, and then some responses to 6, and then 7. Finally, we have 7. Okay, and so if I want to read the following thread, right? So we have 1, and then we have 5 as a response to 1, and then 7 is a response to 5. So look where our eye has to travel. It has to go from 1 to 5 to 7. Okay, so in between 1, 5, and 7, there are like hundreds of comments that you have to scroll through, and so often this spans multiple pages. And what I actually do is keep my cursor at the edge of 1 so that I know when I get to the next response of 1, just because it's so inconvenient to know which comment number 5 is responding to. And so here is a much better interface that is very clean and gives you the same information. So you would have the comments always in linear order. So if I'm looking at comment 7, I would see 1, 5, 7. Okay, and now because the responses to 1 are 5 and 2, okay, so that means 5 is the second comment to 2, and so 1 would have a little slidey bar here to show me that 5 is the second comment to 1. And 7 is the second comment to 5, and so we would see the same thing. And so now, let's say I want to see the other response to 1. Okay, there's only one other response because I can see the size of this bar is half of this entire width. And so what I'll do is I will scroll the 5 away. I'll move it this way. And so the next view that I'll see is 1, and then this slidey bar will slide over this way. Okay, so now we're here. And now I'll see the first comment to 1, which is 2. Okay, and comment 2 has 2 responses, 3 and 4. And so I would see, let's say 3. And again, 3 is the first response to 2, so it would be half covered in. Okay, and if I wanted to see 4, I would just swipe again, right? This time I would swipe this way, and this slidey bar would move over that way. Okay, and so this allows you a much more natural interface, in my opinion, to browsing this kind of complicated tree of responses. And this improvement alone, I think if you leave Reddit exactly the same as it is otherwise, this improvement alone is enough to convince people to switch. A modern bank. Okay, so I think this is easier to cover if we just look at what things a current bank doesn't do well, and then a bank that fixed those would just be a worthy competitor. So first, let's talk about authentication. The authentication in today's banks is atrocious. Okay, so basically, when you give your credit card details to a vendor, that vendor can then use those same details to charge you as many times as they like. There's nothing that you can do to stop them from charging your card. And also, if those credentials get stolen from the vendor, then the thief can also use those credentials to make as many charges as they want on your card. That is just completely insane. Like, this is not the way that you do security today. And because the authentication is so insecure, you need a lot more work to take care of those credentials. There are companies that can do this for you, but those are just middlemen that you have to pay an extra fee to. And so authentication for payments can really be improved. You should only be able to authenticate a specific transaction or a specific recurring transaction, right? Like a limit. Every month, this company can charge me up to $100. What else is broken? Okay, let's talk more about authentication, but from a different perspective. So if I want a service like Mint, which looks at all of my banking history and then gives me analytics on top of that, so how much you spend on entertainment, how much you spend on groceries, etc., then you actually have to give Mint your full banking credentials. So you have to give them your banking login and password. Okay, and that is insane. That is absolutely insane. If you've ever read your bank's terms and conditions, you actually indemnify the bank against any liability if you reveal your password to anybody. So it is just crazy that the authentication is so bad that you cannot actually build a service like Mint without getting access to the user's login and password. So that can definitely be improved. Let's talk about sending large sums of money. So this is very applicable for businesses. In Canada, at least, there is no way to send a wire transfer without physically walking into a bank. Okay, so you can't send it online. Another problem, specifically with Canadian banks, is that they don't offer ACH at all. ACH is this protocol that allows you to send large sums of money with very low transaction fees. And so Canadians are stuck using only wire transfer, which have much higher fees. Another problem with banks is that your card always gets blocked, right? So once a year, I have to call my bank and wait on hold for an hour to get them to unblock my card. Very frustrating. Everything should be doable online without walking in person. Another problem with banks is like random undisclosed fees, right? You just get feed for this, feed for that, account overage fee, low balance fee, transaction fee, account fee, monthly fee, right? Lots of fees. Another problem is that you need the bank's employees to do a lot of stuff for you. Okay, you can't just edit your own info. You can edit some of your own info, but you can't do every possible action. A lot of actions you need the employee to do. And so that introduces lots of human error. I almost never have some major thing changed on my account without having to go back in and fix something that the employee screwed up. So it's very frustrating that there are layers of broken telephone that you have to play anytime you want to take an action. Another problem with current banks is that they're tied to an inflationary fiat currency. And so that just introduces another layer of risk to manage for either you or the business. And finally, if you want to do cross-border transactions, they are very difficult and slow, right? You have to wait for days for your transfer to go through. The fees are very high. It's just, it's not fun to transact across the border. All right, so there are many things that can be improved about the current banking system. And I think that some cryptocurrencies are actually trying to do this and have actually solved some of these problems. The issue is that for any cryptocurrency to succeed, it also has to solve all the other things that a bank does and do it at least as well as a bank. Okay, so things that cryptocurrencies haven't solved yet are, for example, chargebacks, right? When you swipe something on your credit card and you want to undo the transaction because you got scammed or because somebody stole your transactions or because a vendor lied to you or whatever, then you can do a chargeback. You can regain access to your account if you forget your password. With any cryptocurrency, if you lose your keys, you have literally lost all of your life savings. The point of sale transaction speed is very fast, right? It's like under 5 seconds to transact. There are just many things that the banking system does well that any challenger would have to do at least as well in order to be competitive. Okay, and so this is a difficult but very valuable business to build. All right, the next idea that I think is still quite good is Goodreads for Talks. So this one has actually evolved a little bit from what's written down here. The idea is to build a YouTube replacement for long form content. So think of things like talks or lectures or any kind of educational content. YouTube is not quite good for that sort of content because it has such a high preference for short videos that are really recent. Okay, so when I'm watching talks, like for example, Lex Friedman has a great podcast, I don't really want to just see the most recent episode. I kind of just want to see all of them, right? And YouTube, the interface is not set up well to see all of somebody's work. The nice thing about this business is that your users are going to be much more intelligent, much more influential, and much wealthier than the average internet user, just because of the kind of content that's on the site. And so that basically translates to higher ad dollars. All right, next great idea is to build an email provider that competes with Gmail. And what I mean by competes with Gmail is you have to be at least as good at fighting spam as Gmail is. Okay, so there are many email providers that already exist, but they're not nearly as good at Gmail at blocking spam from your inbox. And the basic trade that you do with Gmail is, hey, you give me free email and spam protection, and in exchange, you can spy on all my data. Okay, and that's actually not that great of a trade. And I think there's potential to fight spam in a different way. So the idea is that you attach a payment to every email that you send. So if I want to email you, I would attach a penny to my email in order for it to make it into your inbox. Otherwise, it would go to your spam. And a penny per email is way, way, way too expensive for a spammer to be able to make money. And so that will basically just kill all spam. And it doesn't have to be a fixed price. So every user can customize what it costs to get into their inbox. So for example, you might say everybody in your contact book, it's free for them to get into your inbox. Anybody that I've ever emailed outbound, well, for them, it only costs a penny. And then anybody that I've never had contact with, it costs them $1. And then you, as the email provider, you take 1% of every payment that's sent. And so that means that you've now solved the spam problem and the revenue problem without having to spy on people's emails. The tricky part about this business is it has to somehow integrate with the existing email system, right? So if nobody from Gmail can send you any email, that's not good. And so what you do is, first of all, every email, even from free providers, will end up in your spam inbox. So you can always check that if necessary. But also you can send an automated email. So whenever you receive an email from Gmail, you would send back an automated response to the sender that says, hey, your email ended up in spam, but you can sign up at this email provider to both pay the payment and also to earn money for receiving email. The other nice thing about this is that now emails would be public. So in the current system, it takes a lot of effort to find somebody's email because they're afraid of being signed up to like random subscriptions or whatever. And so everybody keeps their email hidden. And so even if you wanted to pay $50 to email somebody, it's generally difficult because you can't find their email. And so with this email provider, it actually sets up an incentive for everybody to be free to publish their email address, right? Because even a celebrity, if they're charging $100 per email to get into their inbox, they actually don't care if their email is public, right? Because every message that gets in is earning them $100. So I really think if this is executed well, it has potential to compete with Gmail. Okay, let's look for the next great idea here. You can see I'm scrolling through quite a few pages. So yeah, these are pretty rare. Okay, so great ideas, they're not that common. All right, so here's one. The idea is a job site or recruiter business with a properly aligned business model. So the way a job site or headhunter works today is that they charge an upfront fee in order to recruit somebody. So a headhunter might charge 20% of the employee's yearly salary in order to recruit them. Now, the problem with that is that there's now a deep misalignment between the optimal strategy for a recruiter and the optimal strategy for the company that's using the recruiter. For the recruiter, what works best is to have a pool of great engineers or developers or employees, and then to rotate them every year. Because after the employee has been with the same company for a year, they can rotate them to another company and now earn the 20% upfront fee again. And so the optimal strategy is to just rotate them between as many companies as possible every year to keep earning that upfront bonus. For a business, that is absolutely not what I want. What I want is to have great employees that stay with me for a long time. So the idea is to build a recruiting company where it makes the most money if it finds a great match between the employee and the company, and that match persists for a long time. So an example of how that might work, let me switch to my tablet. So let's say this is time and revenue for the recruiter. Okay, so the current model looks like this. I get 20% the first year and then 0 thereafter. Instead, I would get 1% the first year, and then 2% the next year, and then 3% the next year, and then 4% every year after that. And so the total amount of revenue that a recruiter can earn is much higher in this model over the long term than in this model. Okay, but the trick is that they have to keep the person and the company happy. And you can see that the model is much better aligned, because if the recruiter is here, right, they're earning 4% per year from that developer, and then they move that developer to a different company, well, then they have to start here. And now they're earning only 1% for the next year, 2%, etc. So they have to build back up to the 4%. So they make much more money when they keep the same company with the same developer for a long time. This is such an improvement on the business model that you could make a big business here, even competing with all the established job sites. So the next great idea is standardized contracts with fill in the blank for changes to the base template. The way contracts work today is every company has its own set of custom contracts. So whenever you're negotiating between two companies or between a company and a user, you basically have to read this large document because, it's kind of similar to other documents, but it's not exactly the same. And so you have to read the whole contract carefully, which, if you have a 10-page contract, okay, this is very annoying to read. So what you do is you have a base contract. So this might be an Ontario tenancy. And almost every tenancy agreement, the standard terms are pretty similar. There's only a few things that change in a tenancy contract. And so what you do is, instead of having this entire contract be custom, you make this a template called Ontario tenancy. And then you say, okay, this part, the monthly price for the tenancy is a fill in the blank. Okay. And also, are you allowed pets? That's also a fill in the blank. And then also any other, are utilities included? That's also a fill in the blank. And so then your entire contract just says base, Ontario tenancy, and then all the fill in the blanks, right? So you do price, $100 a month, pets, yes, utilities, included. And there might be other standard things that are changed about the contract, and those are just included. And so you end up with about half a page of terms that are specific to this contract, but you don't have to read 10 pages worth of documents in order to understand what's going on, right? You can just tell that, okay, everything is standard except for these things that are different. Okay, and again, when you're moving to a system like this, so if everybody used this system, it would be a lot more efficient than the current system where every contract is custom, right? You're saving at least 80 or 90% of your time in terms of reading and negotiating contracts. But the problem is that nobody's using the system yet, so it has to be backwards compatible. And so this actually ends up being very easily backwards compatible, because you can always, from this format, you can always generate the custom contract. Okay, so if another company is not working with these kind of templates, you can always give them the filled in document, right? You can take the template, fill in the price, pets, utilities, etc., and then give them that full document. Okay, so it's completely backwards compatible. And so it makes sense for any individual company to adopt this internally to use it. And then as more and more companies adopt it, now it makes sense to communicate externally with other companies if they've also adopted the same format. So I think this is a very powerful idea. And actually, a few months ago, I saw a company is trying to execute on this vision. It's called Common Paper. So go check them out if you're interested. All right, so I'm at the end of my list here. So I didn't quite cover all of the ideas on my list because this episode is getting a little bit long. It's almost an hour, but I hope I give you a large enough sample that you can get a sense of my thought process. There is actually one more idea that I haven't covered on my list. It is a great idea, and I'm going to leave that for the next episode so that we can go into full detail. I'll see you next time on Let's Build a Startup.